The scent of gun oil and damp earth had seeped into my bones, a permanent souvenir from my 3 months with the Army Medical Corps. It was there, amidst the grim reality of training, that I discovered a different kind of secret growing within me. A flutter of life where there had only been the quiet ache of loneliness. My husband, Elias Vance, was a colonel, a man carved from granite and discipline. We had been matched by the families, a union of paperwork and politeness after 3 brief formal meetings. Respect was our currency, not love. The news of my pregnancy coincided with a seismic shift in the compound's gossip mill. Anya Petrova was back. She was Elias's battalion commander, his first love, a woman whose legend preceded her. The day she returned from abroad, she was a splash of vibrant color in our world of gray-blue. Her gown was elegant, a deep emerald green that made her stand out like a rare, exotic bird among a flock of sparrows. I stood at the window of our quarters, my hand resting on my still flat stomach, and listened to the whispers slither through the air. If not for Sarah, she would be the one. She's the one he carried off the battlefield. I saw Elias then. He was standing across the courtyard, his posture ramrod straight, but his gaze was fixed on Anya with an intensity one had never seen directed at me. It was a look of raw, unguarded emotion, a burning ember in the cold ash of his usual demeanor. In that moment, something inside me, a hope I hadn't even realized I was still clinging to, quietly shattered. I touched my belly where my little Leo was quietly taking root. "It's okay, little one," I whispered into the stillness of my heart. "We don't need this." The decision crystallized with a clarity that was almost frightening. I wouldn't fight. I wouldn't stay here and be constantly measured against a ghost, my worth weighed in the pitying glances of the other officers' wives. I would leave. I would go back to the city, to my parents, and I would build a life for us. A real life, one built on my own 2 feet. I was in the middle of packing a small suitcase, my movements methodical and calm, when my neighbor, Ben Carter, burst into my home without so much as a knock. His face was flushed with the thrill of bearing bad news. "Sarah, you'll never believe it. Anya Petrova from the performing troupe, she's back." I slowly closed the barefoot doctor's manual I'd been reading, the warm, drowsy afternoon sunlight suddenly feeling oppressive. "Anya," I repeated, the name feeling foreign on my tongue. It stirred nothing in me. No anger, no fear. Just a profound, bone-deep weariness. "How can you be so calm?" Ben pressed, his eyes wide. "She's that one. The medic. The one, Colonel Vance." "I know who she is, Ben," I said, my voice even. I stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the tall sycamore tree in the courtyard. Its leaves were just beginning to turn. What's meant to come will come. As if on cue, a murmur rippled through the compound. I followed the collective gaze to the gate. There they were. Elias, tall and imposing in his uniform, and beside him Anya in her off-white dress. The fabric gleamed in the sun, a stark contrast to his stern olive-green world. She was looking up at him, her expression a perfect blend of excitement and wistful longing. And he was looking down at her with a softness, a guilt-tinged tenderness, that he had never once bestowed upon me. The whispers around me grew sharper, needling into my skin. "That's her, even prettier than her pictures. If her family hadn't fallen, Sarah wouldn't be here." I listened, but my heart was a still lake. Our 1 year of marriage had been one of impeccable courtesy. He gave me his salary, remembered my favorite pastries on anniversaries, and once when I was ill had clumsily attempted a bowl of bland ginger soup. He was a good man, a responsible husband, but he was not my man. His love, his passion, had been given to Anya long ago, sealed with a fragile handcrafted eggshell ring I'd once found in his old uniform pocket. I turned my back on the scene outside and walked to my bedroom. From the bottom of my trunk I pulled out a locked wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a black and white photograph. A younger, brighter-eyed Elias stood beside a girl who smiled like a blooming flower. "Anya." On the back, in his strong, familiar script, were the words, "To my beloved Anya. Forever." A wave of cold, clean clarity washed over me. Better to let go. Better to walk away with my dignity intact than to be the third, unwanted wheel in a tragedy of someone else's making. That night, Elias came home late. He carried the faint, sharp scent of alcohol and, underneath it, a whisper of perfume that was not mine. It was floral and light, Nothing like the simple snow cream I used. He sat on the edge of the bed, his large frame seeming to carry the weight of the world. Sarah, he began, his voice rough with hesitation. There's something I need to tell you. I didn't turn to look at him. I kept my back to him, pulling the blanket higher. Anya is back. He went completely still. I could feel the shock radiating from him. You know. I already knew, I said, my voice flat. Everyone in the compound knows. The silence that fell between us was thick and heavy, broken only by the sound of our breathing. I could feel his gaze on my back, puzzled, complex. Back then, it was because of me, he started, an explanation forming on his lips. There's no need, I cut him off, the words final. I took a deep breath, gathering all my courage. Elias, let's get a divorce. The bed jolted as if struck. What did you say? His voice was laced with pure, unadulterated disbelief. I slowly turned to face him, meeting his dark, stormy eyes. They held shock and confusion, but no plea, no desperation. The last flicker of hope in my heart sputtered and died. I said, let's get a divorce. I repeated, each word a clear, sharp stone dropped into the silence between us. I'll step aside for the two of you. I thought he would agree immediately, or at least show a flicker of relief. Instead, he just stared at me, his brows furrowed as if he were trying to decipher a complex military map. Just because Anya is back? He asked, his voice low. Not entirely. I shook my head and, without thinking, placed a protective hand over my stomach. His eyes followed the movement and his gaze sharpened. You're pregnant. The words came out in a sharp, disbelieving exhale. His shock was a physical thing in the room. I didn't answer. I just watched him, watch the storm of emotions cross his face. Shock, panic, a dawning horror. It was all the confirmation I needed. When, he finally managed, his voice trembling. He reached a hand out, then hesitated, letting it fall in the space between us. Over a month, I replied calmly. Why didn't you tell me sooner? The question was edged with a hint of accusation. A faint, bitter smile touched my lips. Tell you what? That while you were reuniting with your long-lost first love, the wife you never loved was carrying your child. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. He flinched as if I'd struck him. His face paled. Sarah, I never thought of you or the baby as an inconvenience. Really? I arched an eyebrow, a gesture I'd learned from him. Then what is this expression on your face telling me? That you're thrilled. I pointed to my belly. This is your child, Elias. But he shouldn't be a chain that binds the three of us in misery. Anya has waited for you. You owe her a life. Now that she's back, you should give it to her. My words hung in the air, a surgeon's knife laying his heart bare. He was silent for a long time, the only sound the ragged pull of his breath. And you? He finally asked, his voice hoarse. What about you and the baby? I gave a small, mirthless laugh and reached under my pillow. I pulled out the divorce papers I had prepared days ago and handed them to him. I'm going back to my city. My parents have been waiting for me. As for the child, I said, my voice firm, he will carry my surname, Reed. You will have nothing to do with the Vance family. You can rest assured, Elias, I may not be anyone important, but I have more than enough ability to raise my child on my own. My decisiveness had clearly blindsided him. He stared at the papers in his hand, the black and white text a stark representation of the end I was demanding. Have you really thought this through? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I met his gaze, my own steady and sure. Never in my life have I been more clear. Elias Vance, sign them. It will be the best for all of us. That night we slept in separate rooms. I took the bedroom. He made a bed for himself on the old camp cot in the living room. In the middle of the night I was woken by the sound of stifled, painful coughing. It was Elias. His old battlefield injury, the one that flared up when the weather changed or his emotions ran high. I got up and poured him a glass of water. He was leaning against the wall, his forehead beaded with sweat, his face pale and strained in the moonlight. He took the cup and his fingers brushed against mine. His skin was burning. Thank you, he rasped after drinking. You're welcome, I said, my tone distant as I pulled my hand back. After all, until we have that divorce certificate, I'm still your legal wife. Taking care of you is my duty. The words were meant to be a simple statement of fact, but they landed like a blow. He looked up at me sharply, his eyes flashing with a flicker of genuine hurt. Sarah, he said, his voice raw, do we really have to go this far? I didn't answer. I simply turned and walked back into the bedroom, closing the door softly behind me. Some questions already had their answers written in stone. There was no point in asking them again. The next morning I continued packing my things with a grim determination. The suitcase, a heavy wooden trunk, was nearly full, containing my clothes, my books, and the small locked box that held the remnants of my marriage. I was folding a sweater when a light knock came at the door. I opened it to find Anya Petrova standing there, looking as ethereal as ever. She held a delicate mesh bag containing several bright red apples. In the 1970s they were a rare luxury. Comrade Reed, she greeted me, a practiced, graceful smile on her lips. Hello. My name is Anya. I'm Elias's comrade in arms. She deliberately emphasized the last two words, a subtle declaration of a shared history I could never be part of. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Miss Petrova. What can I do for you? My cool indifference made her smile falter for a fraction of a second before she recovered. I heard you weren't feeling well, so I came to visit. These are snake apples I had someone bring from abroad. They're very sweet. No merit, no reward, I said evenly. Take them back, Miss Petrova. After all, Colonel Vance needs your care more than I do. I had used his title deliberately and I saw her eyes flicker. She put on a pitiful expression, a masterclass in manipulation. Comrade Reed, perhaps you've misunderstood. Elias and I, what we had was in the past. Now you are his wife. I would never interfere. I almost laughed. What a perfectly two-edged thing to say, claiming innocence while twisting the knife. A misunderstanding? I kept my face impassive. I don't think so. After all, Colonel Vance coughed half the night last night because of the past. I emphasized the word and her face finally fell. She hadn't expected the meek stand-in to be so blunt, to refuse to play the game of polite pretense. You, she started, her lips trembling with anger she couldn't quite release. Just then Elias returned from his morning rounds. He took in the scene at the door, Anya's wounded expression, my defiant stance, and his brows knitted together. What's going on here? The moment Anya saw him, her eyes welled up with tears. Elias, she said, her voice a wounded whisper, I only wanted to visit Comrade Reed, but it seems she has misunderstood me. His gaze immediately shifted to me, carrying a clear note of reproach. Sarah, Anya is a guest. The word felt like a slap. A guest. My own home. I smiled, though I felt the sting of tears at the corners of my eyes. A guest? That's a good one. I nodded, then turned back inside. I grabbed the divorce papers from the table and, right in front of Anya, slapped them against Elias's chest. Colonel Vance, since your guest has arrived, then I, the unwanted wife, will take my leave. I want you to sign these papers today. Otherwise, I'll take them directly to the political commissar of the military district and let everyone see how their mighty Colonel Vance carries on with his first love while his wife is pregnant with his child. I didn't wait for a response. I turned, grabbed my packed suitcase and walked out of the house that had suffocated me for a year. The sunlight in the courtyard was blinding, but it felt like freedom. Behind me I heard Elias's low, furious growl. Sarah Reed, stop right there. But I didn't stop. I wouldn't. I walked, my back straight, dragging the heavy trunk step by step, my resolve hardening with every footfall. The officers' wives were at their windows, pointing and whispering. Once their gossip would have felt like 1,000 tiny cuts. Now it was just noise. Their opinions had no power over my life anymore. I went straight to the logistics office and found Officer Zhang, the man in charge of vehicle assignments. I handed him a high-quality cigarette, one my father had sent me. Officer Zhang, I'd like to request a car to take me to the train station. He looked at the cigarette, then at me, hesitating. Sister-in-law, does Colonel Vance know about this? You know, military vehicles can't just be used for. Soon I won't be anyone's sister-in-law. I cut him off, my voice calm. I'm divorcing him. This is the last time I'll use my identity as his wife to ask the unit for a favor. It won't happen again. My bluntness stunned him into silence. He finally took the cigarette. Sister-in-law, why put yourself through this? Colonel Vance, he's a good man. I know, I finished for him quietly. It's me who doesn't deserve him. Please just arrange for the car, Officer Zhang. My resolve was a solid, unshakable thing. He eventually arranged for me to ride in a supply truck heading to the county. Sitting in the rattling passenger seat, I watched the familiar compound grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared from view. I felt no reluctance, only a soaring sense of liberation. Goodbye, Elias Vance. Goodbye, my short, suffocating marriage. At the train station I bought the earliest ticket home. A hard seat. In the noisy, bustling waiting hall, surrounded by the smells of sweat and travel, I touched the money in my pocket. 327 yuan and 5 jiao. It was my life savings, the wages Elias had given me and what I'd saved from my own frugality. It was enough. It had to be. My hometown was the provincial capital. Both my parents worked in a state-owned factory. I could stay with them, find a job. I'd finished high school, I was clever. I wouldn't let my child starve. For the first time thinking of the future I felt a thrill of excitement. I was the master of my own destiny. Sarah. The voice was a thunderclap in the crowded hall. I whipped my head around and saw him. Elias Vance in his crisp uniform striding toward me, his handsome face a mask of fury and panic. How had he found me? Instinctively I tightened my grip on my ticket. In a few strides he was in front of me, his tall frame blocking out the world. He grabbed my wrist, his grip like iron. Come back with me, he commanded, his voice vibrating with rage. Let go of me. I struggled, but it was useless. Sarah, stop this, he said, a pleading note entering his tone. Whatever it is, we can talk about it at home. All right. Home. I laughed coldly, staring straight into his furious eyes. Which home, Elias? The one with you and Anya. Sorry, I find it filthy. My words made him flinch, and his grip loosened just enough for me to pull my hand away. Colonel Vance, please mind your behavior. We're about to be divorced. If you keep manhandling me, it won't look good for you. I stepped back, putting space between us. The commotion had drawn a crowd. Elias seemed to realize it too. He took a deep, steadying breath. Sarah, he said, his voice rough. I know you're angry. I didn't handle things with Anya well. Just give me a little time. Time. I cut him off. I gave you a year, Elias Vance. Wasn't that enough? Ask yourself, in that year did you love me for even 1 day? 1 hour? 1 single minute? My questions were daggers aimed straight at his heart. He fell silent, his dark eyes roiling with emotions I couldn't name. Pain, struggle, confusion. But he couldn't answer. The truth was a wall between us. See? You can't answer. I gave him a calm final smile and waved my ticket. So don't feed me that nonsense about time. Let me go. It's better for you, for her, and for me. Just then the train whistle blew, a long, mournful sound. It was time to board. I turned my back on him and merged with the river of passengers. Sarah. He grabbed my arm from behind one last time, his voice now filled with unmistakable panic. You can't leave. He clutched at my suitcase. You're carrying my child. I turned back, meeting his bloodshot eyes. Slowly, firmly, I said, from the moment you chose Anya, this child has had nothing to do with you. With a final, determined wrench, I tore myself from his grasp and melted into the crowd, finding my seat on the train. I could feel his burning gaze on me until the train began to move. Leaning against the window, I watched his tall, uniformed figure on the platform grow smaller and blurrier until he was gone. I thought I would cry, but I didn't. A single hot tear might have escaped, but I brushed it away. I placed a gentle hand on my belly and whispered, "Don't be afraid, little Leo. From now on it's just you and me. And we are going to be just fine." What I didn't see was Elias Vance, the usually calm and controlled colonel, running desperately after the train as it pulled away, shouting my name until his voice was swallowed by the wind and the engine's roar. But it didn't matter. I was already gone. The train headed north, and with each mile, the tight knot of anxiety in my chest began to loosen. The scenery outside shifted from the familiar military landscape to rolling countryside, and finally to the outskirts of the provincial capital. The air itself seemed to change, smelling less of discipline and more of possibility, tinged with coal smoke and industry. It was the smell of home. When I finally dragged my heavy trunk through the door of my parents' apartment, their reactions were a study in contrasts. My mother, May, dropped the chopping knife she was holding with a clatter, her hands flying to her mouth. "Sarah, my girl, what are you doing here? Where's Elias?" My father, David Reed, looked up from his newspaper, his face immediately settling into a stern mask. I saw the unspoken "I told you so" in his eyes. He had never been fully on board with my marriage to a soldier, warning me of the loneliness and the unbridgeable gaps in such an arranged match. I set down my suitcase, the finality of the thud it made on the floor seeming to echo in the sudden silence of the room. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "I'm divorcing Elias Vance." The living room plummeted into a deeper silence. "What?" My mother's shriek was followed by the sound of the hot water flask slipping from her grasp and smashing on the floor, sending a wave of scalding water and glass shards across the tiles. "Nonsense." My father slammed his hand on the table, his face flushing a dark red. "Divorce? For no reason? Did that boy mistreat you? I'll have his stripes." I guided my trembling mother to a chair and began to clean up the mess, using the mundane task to anchor myself as I explained. I told them everything, or at least a carefully edited version of everything. I spoke of Anya's return, of the unspoken history that filled the compound, of the polite, loveless cage my marriage had become. I spared them the most painful details: the burning look in Elias's eyes when he saw Anya, the way his touch had felt like a brand of duty, not love. I simply said our personalities were incompatible, that we couldn't live together anymore, and that I was pregnant. When I finished, my mother clutched me to her tears soaking my shoulder. "My poor daughter," she sobbed. "Why didn't you tell us? Why did you bear it alone?" My father was silent for a long time. He stared out the window at the concrete apartment blocks, his shoulders slumped. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world. He came over and placed a firm, calloused hand on my shoulder. "As long as you're back, that's all that matters," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Leave the rest to me. I want to see if the Vance family thinks they can just trample over my daughter like this." I knew his anger was just his heartbroken way of protecting me. In the days that followed, my family tiptoed around me. My mother cooked all my favorite dishes, her love expressed in steaming bowls of soup and carefully prepared meals. My father started calling in favors from his old factory connections, trying to find me a light, easy job. The unspoken assumption was that I would now follow the conventional path: a safe, state-owned job, a quiet life. But I had no intention of being conventional. I handed over most of the money I'd brought with me, keeping only a small portion for myself. "I don't want to just sit at home," I told them. "I need to work." It was the late 1970s, and the winds of reform were beginning to stir, a faint but perceptible breeze promising change. I could feel it. I remembered the commercial explosion that was coming from my past life, the vibrant, chaotic, and opportunity-rich era that would redefine China. I had drifted aimlessly in a state-owned factory in my previous existence, only to be cast aside during the layoffs. My spirit and prospects diminished. I refused to waste the second chance. As I had been reborn. The knowledge was a secret fire burning in my heart. In my first life, when Anya had returned, I had chosen to endure. I thought virtue and patience would eventually warm Elias's heart. I was wrong. I had endured for a lifetime, fought silent, bitter battles for decades, and all I received at the end was a hollow, guilt-ridden apology that was never truly meant for me. It was for her, for the ghost he had carried in his heart. This time I would live for myself. One afternoon, while walking through the bustling market streets, my mind buzzing with ideas, I spotted a familiar, graceful figure. It was Anya. But she was transformed. Gone was the delicate, ethereal dress. She wore a plain, functional work outfit, and her face, devoid of its usual pitiful charm, was sharp and efficient. She was speaking in low, hurried tones with a man who had the unmistakable look of a black market dealer. I ducked behind a cart, watching as they exchanged a wad of cash for a small, carefully wrapped parcel with a speed that spoke of practiced routine. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was her grand return from abroad? My curiosity piqued, I decided to follow her. I trailed her at a distance as she skillfully wove through a labyrinth of narrow alleys, finally slipping into a secluded courtyard. Peering through a crack in the wooden gate, I saw it wasn't a home. It was a storage point. Inside were piles of colorful fabrics, polyester shirts, and electronic components. A nest of speculation and profiteering. A cold, hard smile touched my lips. So the pure, untouchable Anya, The woman Elias saw as a beacon of lost love was a black market dealer. In the 1970s, this wasn't just shady, it was a serious crime, enough to land someone in prison with the damning label of a capitalist roader. I didn't confront her. I didn't make a sound. I simply memorized the address, etching it into my mind. This information was leverage. A card I might need to play one day. When I returned home, my mind was made up. "Dad," I said, finding him mending a chair in the living room. "You've been trying to find me a job. I've decided. I don't want to work in a state factory. I want to start my own business." "Business?" He frowned, putting down his tools. "You're a girl. What kind of business would you run? It's not respectable being out there dealing with all sorts of people." "Dad, times are changing," I said, sitting opposite him, leaning forward with an intensity that made him look up. "The country's policies are loosening. I've read about it in the papers. Private business is the future. We have to seize the chance." I repackaged the foresight from my past life as things I'd read or heard, painting a vivid picture of the coming economic boom. I spoke of demand, of opportunity, of being at the forefront of a new wave. He looked doubtful, his old-school sensibilities warring with the conviction in my voice. But he saw the fire in my eyes, a determination he hadn't seen in me since before my marriage. What do you want to do?" he finally asked, his resistance wavering. "I want to set up a stall. I want to sell clothes," I said, and I laid out my plan in detail. I would start with the most daring, fashionable items on the cusp of trend: bell-bottom pants and bold floral shirts. I knew it wouldn't be long before this wave of individualistic style swept the country, and whoever saw it first would earn the first pot of gold. My father was silent, but I could see the wheels turning. The future I painted was alluring even to him. Finally, with a grunt that was as close to approval as I would get, he said, "All right. We'll use some of the family savings. But you be careful." It was all the permission I needed. With the startup money in hand, I moved quickly. I found a contact through one of my father's old friends who could source the latest, most vibrant fabrics from the South. I then hired 3 skilled but underemployed tailors, and with the patterns I sketched from memory of future trends, we worked day and night. The small apartment filled with the whir of sewing machines and the smell of new cloth. Soon we had produced our first batch: 30 pairs of flared bell-bottoms in dark denim and navy, and 20 vibrantly patterned floral shirts. Everything was ready. I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in years. This was mine. My creation, my risk, my future. But the day before my stall was set to open, as I was arranging the final items, a shadow fell across my doorway. I looked up and my blood ran cold. It was Elias Vance. He looked terrible. Worn and travel-stained, he seemed to have lost a significant amount of weight. A rough, dark stubble covered his jaw, and his uniform was wrinkled, stripped of its usual impeccable sharpness. But when his eyes found me, they lit up with a desperate, hungry hope, like a man in a desert finally spotting an oasis. "Sarah." My name was a hoarse, trembling whisper on his lips. My mother, who had been helping me, stormed forward, her face a thundercloud. "What are you doing here? You're not welcome in this house. Get out." I held up a hand to stop her. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but I kept my face a calm mask. "Why are you here, Elias?" He ignored my mother's fury, his gaze locked on me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a document, holding it out to me. It was the divorce application. "I don't agree to the divorce," he said, his voice firm, laced with an unprecedented determination. "I had the commissar reject your application." His words landed in the small apartment like a grenade. My father exploded from his chair. "On what grounds?" he roared, his beard bristling. "My daughter doesn't want to live with you anymore. Do you think you can force her? Elias Vance, don't think your rank makes you untouchable." "Dad, please," I said, placing a calming hand on his arm. I then turned my cold gaze back to Elias. "Colonel Vance, what is the meaning of this? Haven't you heard the saying, 'A forced melon is never sweet'?" "I know," he said, his eyes never leaving my face. "But you're carrying my child. I can't let him be born without a father." "Father?" The laugh that escaped me was harsh and brittle. "Now you remember you're his father? When Anya came back, did you for 1 second remember I was carrying your child?" He paled, his confident posture faltering. His lips parted, but no sound came out. "Sarah, I was wrong before," he said, his voice dropping, a rare note of pleading entering his tone. His pride was crumbling before my eyes. Just give me another chance. I'll take care of things with Anya. From now on we'll live a good life together. A proper life. A good life. The same empty promise from a previous lifetime. The ghost of that endured misery rose up inside me, giving me strength. A good life. I stared at him, the ridiculousness of it all washing over me. No, Elias. No need. I shook my head, my voice as resolute as steel. My mind is made up. This marriage is over. If you refuse to sign, I'll file a lawsuit. I don't believe there isn't a place in this country that will stand up for justice for a woman and her unborn child. With that, I turned my back on him. I walked into my bedroom and slammed the door shut, leaning against it as my knees finally gave way. Outside, I could hear my mother's furious scolding and his low, muffled attempts to explain. I closed my eyes, my heart cold as stone. Elias Vance, did you really think one rejected application could keep me chained to you? You have severely underestimated the woman I have become. The very next day, fueled by a potent mix of defiance and determination, I opened for business. I chose the busiest street corner near the city's central bus station, a river of humanity constantly flowing past. I hung my bright, daring bell-bottoms and floral shirts on a simple metal rack, and beside it, I placed a hand-painted sign on a piece of cardboard, Sarah's New Trends. The name felt bold, a declaration of my new identity. The reactions were immediate. In the conservative tail end of the 1970s, my clothes were a revolution. Most people wore drab, uniform-like outfits in shades of blue, gray, and green. My stall was a burst of defiant color. People stared. Some with curiosity, some with open disapproval, but the young people, they looked with hungry eyes. A brave young girl, her hair in two neat braids, approached. She tentatively touched the wide leg of a pair of dark green bell-bottoms. "Hey, comrade," she asked, her voice a mix of suspicion and fascination. "Why are the legs of these pants so wide?" "They're called bell-bottoms," I explained with a warm, encouraging smile. "It's the most popular style in Hong Kong and the West right now." "Look," I said, holding them up against her. "With your tall, slim figure, you'd look absolutely stunning in these. Do you want to try them on?" I had set up a makeshift fitting room using a cloth partition hung from a rope. Encouraged by my confidence, the girl blushed and nodded, taking the pants and disappearing behind the curtain. A few minutes later she emerged. A collective gasp went through the small crowd that had gathered. The flared legs swayed as she moved, making her seem both stylish and free. The dark green fabric made her look modern, sophisticated, a world away from the baggy trousers everyone else was wearing. "Oh my God," she whispered, staring at her reflection in the small mirror I'd propped up. "This looks so good." She turned, admiring the way the pants moved. "I'll take them." Without another moment's hesitation, she pulled out a worn leather wallet and paid for the pants. That first sale was the crack in the dam. With one brave soul leading the way, the others followed. Soon my stall was swarmed, mostly by young men and women eager to express themselves, to grasp a piece of the outside world they only heard whispers about. By noon, I had sold more than half of the 50-plus items I'd brought. My hands were stained with newsprint from handling the money, my voice was growing hoarse from explaining, and my feet ached from standing, but I was bursting with a joy so profound it was almost dizzying. This was better than any fixed wage. This was creation. This was freedom. And through it all I was aware of him. Elias. He had shed his military uniform and now wore a simple white short-sleeved shirt and blue work pants, trying to blend in with the workers and factory hands who passed by. He didn't approach. He didn't speak. He just stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, a silent, brooding sentinel, his eyes never leaving me. I pretended not to see him. I focused on my customers, on the music of clinking coins and rustling bills. It wasn't until I started packing up as the sun began to set that he finally moved. He walked over and, without a word, began to help. He folded the unsold clothes with a soldier's neatness, dismantled the racks, and hoisted the heavy bundle onto his broad shoulder. "I'll walk you home," he said, his voice low, leaving no room for argument. "There's no need. I can manage myself," I replied coolly, my back to him. "It's getting dark. You're pregnant. It's not safe," he insisted, and he started walking ahead of me, carrying my livelihood on his shoulder. I had no choice but to follow. We walked in silence, the sounds of the city evenings settling around us. Bicycle bells, the distant hum of factory shifts changing, the sizzle of food from street vendors. I looked at his broad back, the easy strength with which he carried the load, and my heart was a tangle of conflicting emotions. Resentment, a flicker of unwanted gratitude, and a deep, aching confusion. As we neared my parents' apartment building, he stopped and turned to face me. The setting sun cast long shadows across his face, highlighting his weariness. "Sarah," he began, his voice hesitant. "I know you're still angry." He pulled a small waxed paper packet from his pocket and held it out to me. "These are your favorite osmanthus cakes. I waited in line for a long time to get them from that shop you liked. Please have some." Under the dim, newly lit street lamp, his eyes held a trace of cautious hope, a vulnerability I had never seen in him before. It was a look that threatened to unravel my carefully constructed defenses. My chest tightened. There was a time not so long ago when a simple gesture like this from him would have made my whole week. But now everything was different. "Elias Vance," I said, my voice firm, my hands remaining at my sides. "You don't have to do this. It's over between us." "No, it's not," he burst out suddenly, his control snapping. He grabbed my shoulders, his grip firm but not painful. "Sarah, as long as I don't agree to a divorce, you are still my wife. Let go of me." I struggled against his hold, panic and anger flaring. Just then, a chorus of leering, mocking voices cut through the twilight from the end of the alley. Well, what do we have here? A young couple having a lover's spat. 3 thuggish men swaggered toward us, their eyes crawling over me with unpleasant intent. The leader, a man with a scar down his cheek, smirked. "Pretty girl, how about ditching this guy and having some real fun with us?" In an instant, Elias shoved me behind him. His entire posture transformed. The weary, pleading man was gone, replaced by a predator. His gaze turned razor-sharp, and the air around him seemed to crackle with dangerous energy. "Get lost," he growled, his voice low but carrying the unmistakable, chilling force of a battlefield command. The thugs just sneered, unfazed. "Tough guy, huh? Do you know whose turf this is?" The leader never finished his sentence. Elias moved. It wasn't a brawl, it was a demolition. I barely saw a blur of motion, a precise grab, a sharp twist, a devastating kick. It was over in seconds. The 3 men were on the ground, groaning in pain, clutching arms and shoulders. Elias stood over them, his shirt not even rumpled, his breathing barely elevated. He dusted off his hands as if he'd just taken out the trash. He turned back to me, the ferocity in his eyes melting away into immediate, palpable worry. "Sarah, are you all right? Did I scare you?" he asked, his voice soft again. I shook my head, though my heart was pounding and waves of shock were crashing through me. I knew he was a soldier, but I had never seen this side of him, the raw, lethal efficiency of a man honed by combat. It was terrifying and, I hated to admit, fiercely impressive. He checked me over nervously, and only after confirming I wasn't hurt did he let out a sigh of relief. "Don't walk alone at night anymore," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I looked at him, at the concern etched on his face, and a treacherous thought wormed its way into my mind. "Elias Vance, is everything you do for me really just out of responsibility and duty for the child? If it's only duty, then why would you fight for me with such ferocity?" The doubt was a seed planted deep in the cold soil of my heart, and it had quietly begun to sprout. After that night, Elias became my shadow. Every day when I set up my stall, he would appear and take up his post a discreet distance away. He never interfered, never spoke unless spoken to. But every evening as I packed up, he would wordlessly shoulder the heaviest load and walk me home. At first, my mother would still greet him with a broom and a stream of invective. But after seeing him take the abuse silently, his head bowed, not fighting back or talking back, her fury gradually subsided into resigned, eye-rolling tolerance. Meanwhile, my business flourished. Sarah's New Trends became a known name among the youth of the provincial capital. The money I earned felt different from Elias's salary. It was earned by my own wit and sweat. The first thing I did was pay off all my parents' lingering debts. Then I bought them new clothes, a better radio, treats they never would have bought for themselves. The smiles on their faces, the pride in my father's eyes when he talked about my little enterprise, gave me a sense of fulfillment I had never found within the walls of the military compound. One day, amidst the usual lunchtime rush, An unexpected and unwelcome customer arrived. It was Anya. She was back to her old self, dressed in a deceptively simple but well-tailored dress, her face a mask of gentle grace. But in her eyes, I saw the flicker of a jealousy and resentment she couldn't quite hide. She looked over my simple, bustling stall, then her gaze drifted to Elias, standing watch like a loyal guardian, and the corner of her lips curled into a mocking smile. "Sarah," she said, stepping closer, her voice a low purr meant only for my ears. "I never thought you had this kind of ability in you. You gave up being a colonel's wife just to stand out here on the street like a common peddler? Aren't you afraid you'll embarrass Elias?" "Colonel's wife. I didn't stop folding a floral shirt for a customer. Sorry, I gave up that title a long time ago. If you want it, you can have it anytime. It seems he's having trouble finalizing the paperwork, though. You might want to ask him about that." Anya's face went pale, then flushed with anger. She was so choked she could barely speak. The customers around us were starting to stare. I finally put down what I was holding and looked straight at her, a cold smile on my face. "Miss Petrova, this is a place of business. If you want to buy clothes, you're welcome. If you're here to stir up trouble, then I'm sorry." I gestured toward the street. "Turn right at the door. I won't see you out." "Don't get too smug, Sarah," she hissed, leaning in so close I could smell her floral perfume. "Do you really think you've won? Let me tell you, the only person in Elias's heart will always be me. The way he's treating you now is only because of that child in your belly. Once the baby's born, just wait and see if he even bothers with you anymore." "Is that so?" I arched an eyebrow, utterly unbothered. "Then let's wait and see." Frustrated by my indifference, Anya stamped her foot in a surprisingly childish gesture and stormed off. She stopped in front of Elias, clearly expecting him to comfort her or at least acknowledge her grievance. He simply gave her a cold, impassive look and said nothing. Humiliated, she had no choice but to retreat, her back stiff with fury. Watching her go, I felt a surge of grim satisfaction. That evening, as Elias carried my things home, he broke the silence. "Anya came to see you today." "Yes," I answered lightly. "She didn't do anything to you, did she?" His tone was laced with genuine concern. "What could she possibly do to me?" I countered, then added sharply, "Tell me, Colonel Vance, are you worried about me? Or are you worried about your precious white moonlight? Afraid she might be wronged at my hands." My words were barbed, meant to wound. Elias stopped in his tracks and turned to face me. He stared at me, his eyes deep and conflicted in the moonlight. "Sarah." His voice was hoarse. "I know that no matter what I say right now you won't believe me. But between me and her, it's really over." "Over?" I let out a cold, disbelieving laugh. "Then why does she still call you Elias, with such intimate affection? Why does she still act like she's the only woman who has ever owned your heart?" "I will cut all ties with her," he promised, his gaze more intense and serious than I had ever seen it. "Completely. Sarah, believe me." I said nothing. I simply turned my head and kept walking, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the quiet alley. Trust, once broken, is a shattered vase. You can try to glue the pieces back together, but the cracks will always show. And I was no longer sure I had the strength or the desire to try. The fragile truce between Elias and me continued for another week. He was my silent shadow by day, my stoic escort by night. The seed of doubt he'd planted was growing, fed by his unwavering presence and the memory of him facing down those thugs for me. I found myself watching him when he thought I wasn't looking, studying the new lines of weariness around his eyes, the quiet intensity of his gaze as he watched over my stall. My business was thriving. Sarah's New Trends was no longer just a stall. It was a destination. I'd expanded, adding scarves and hair accessories, and was already sketching designs for the next season. The independence was a heady drug, and the life growing within me felt like a partner in this grand adventure, not a chain. Then the trouble I had been half expecting finally arrived. It was a busy Saturday afternoon. The stall was surrounded by a chattering, excited crowd. I was in the middle of haggling good-naturedly with a group of factory girls over a batch of floral shirts when a harsh voice cut through the din. "All right, that's enough. Everyone clear out." 3 men in the drab, official uniforms of the Market Supervision Bureau pushed their way through the crowd. Their leader, a middle-aged man with a pinched face and a permanent scowl, glared at my display. What is the meaning of this? I asked, my heart sinking into my stomach. We've received a report that you are engaged in illegal speculation and profiteering, he stated, his voice cold and bureaucratic. This operation is shut down. All goods are confiscated. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through me. That's not true. I have my permits. I'm responding to the state's call to invigorate the economy. I moved to block them as one of his lackeys began grabbing armfuls of my carefully folded shirts. Enough talk. You can explain it all down at the station. Come with us. He gestured roughly and his men started hauling my clothes and racks toward their waiting truck. Tears of frustration and fear pricked at my eyes. This was everything. My savings, my future, my pride. It was all being loaded onto that truck. I felt a wave of dizziness, my hand instinctively flying to my stomach. Please, not now. Just as a rough hand closed around my arm to escort me away, a figure moved with the speed of a striking hawk. Take your hand off her. Elias's voice was low, but it carried a vibration that made the air itself seem to still. He stood between me and the officials, his posture radiating an authority that made the bureau men seem like petty bullies. The pinched-faced leader sneered, recovering from his initial surprise. And who are you to interfere with law enforcement? Elias didn't even look at him. He simply pulled out his military ID, the red cover seeming to glow in the afternoon sun. He held it up. Colonel Elias Vance, People's Liberation Army. The transformation was instantaneous. The man's face went from arrogant to ashen in a heartbeat. All his bluster evaporated. See, Colonel Vance. This is a misunderstanding. We were just following procedure. Following procedure? Elias's eyes narrowed dangerously. He took a step closer and the official flinched. Funny. The procedure I'm familiar with involves verifying permits before confiscating a citizen's lawful property. The procedure I heard about involved a certain incentive to come here and cause trouble today. Cold sweat instantly beaded on the man's forehead. And no, absolutely not. Nothing like that. Good. Elias's voice was like ice. For your sake, I hope not. My wife's business is legal and fully permitted. If she loses so much as a single button from this misunderstanding, I will hold you personally accountable. Now, he gestured to the truck, put everything back. Exactly as it was. The officials scrambled. They fell over themselves to unload my goods, carefully rehanging the clothes, reassembling the racks with trembling hands. The crowd, which had drawn back, now watched in awed silence. Once the last shirt was back in place and the chastened officials had slunk away, Elias turned to me. The fierce protector was gone, replaced by a man whose eyes were soft with worry. He saw the tear tracks on my cheeks and reached out, his rough thumb gently brushing them away. Don't be afraid, he murmured, his voice a low rumble. I'm here. In that moment, as I looked into his steady gaze, feeling the solid, reassuring presence of him, I felt the ice wall around my heart crack. A large piece of it shattered and fell away. He had stood for me. Not out of duty but with a ferocity that spoke of something deeper. The officials were gone and the onlookers began to disperse, buzzing with the story. But I couldn't share their excitement. I looked at Elias with a tumult of emotions, profound gratitude warring with a bitter resentment that I still needed him to fight my battles. Thank you, I said quietly, my tone still holding a trace of distance. We're husband and wife, he said, his eyes searching mine for a connection. There's no need to thank me. He paused and the plea returned to his voice. Sarah, come back with me. It's too dangerous out here. I don't want you to ever have to face something like that again. Go back. I gave a bitter, broken laugh. Back to being your caged canary? Back to watching you and Anya play out your epic romance? Elias Vance, let me tell you, never. I took a shaky breath, the suspicion that had been gnawing at me finally spilling out. Today's incident was Anya's doing, wasn't it? Who else would be so petty, so low to target me like this? Elias's face darkened. He didn't deny it. His silence was as good as a confession. I spread my hands, a gesture of hopelessness. You see, as long as she's around, we will never have peace. The only clean ending for us is divorce. I don't want to be entangled in this drama with her anymore. I will handle her, Elias said, his voice low and final. Sarah, I'll only ask you one more time. He looked at me, his gaze stripping away all my defenses, all my anger, until I felt raw and exposed. Do you really not have any feelings left for me at all? The question hit me with the force of a physical blow. I froze. Did I? If not, then why had my heart leaped into my throat when he stepped in front of me? If not, then why did the gentle touch of his hand wiping my tears feel like a brand of belonging? If not, then why did the mere sight of his lonely walking away cause such a sharp physical pain in my chest? I didn't dare to think too deeply. The scars from my past life were like shackles holding me back. I was afraid, terrified that if I let myself feel for him again, I would only end up shattered, just as I had been before. No. The word left my mouth, cold and hard and final. I saw his body sway as if I'd struck him. The light in his eyes, the stubborn, hopeful ember that had refused to die, was snuffed out, leaving behind a dull, empty darkness. The sight was more painful than I could have imagined. Okay, he said, his voice heavy with a bottomless exhaustion and disappointment. I understand. He quietly, mechanically helped me pack up the rest of my things. Then without another word he turned and walked away. The setting sun stretched his shadow long and lonely down the street, and with every step he took, the tearing sensation in my chest grew worse, until I could barely breathe. Watching him disappear, I leaned against my stall, my hand pressed to my heart, wondering if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life, in this life or any other. The days that followed were quiet. Eerily so. Elias didn't come. The space where he used to stand was just empty air. I should have felt relieved. I was free of his complicated presence, free of the emotional turmoil he brought. But the emptiness was a physical ache. The stall felt too big, the walk home too long, the nights too silent. My mother noticed. Sarah, she asked tentatively one evening as I picked at my dinner, do you still have feelings for that man? I shook my head, my voice stiff. No. Silly girl, she sighed, stroking my hair. Feelings aren't something you can lie about. You say no, but your absent-mindedness these past few days is written all over your face. Her words left me deep in thought, stirring a restlessness I couldn't quell. The following day, an old comrade of my father's from the Public Security Bureau came to visit. They closed themselves in the study for a long time. When they emerged, my father's face was unusually grave. He called me into the kitchen, his voice low. Sarah, he said, I just got word. That woman, Anya, the one you mentioned, she's been reported for speculation and profiteering. The Public Security Bureau has enough evidence. They're opening a formal case. She'll probably be arrested within the week. I was stunned. Reported? By who? My father gave me a long, complicated look. Elias Vance. It was him. The world tilted on its axis. I gripped the counter for support. He did that. I had thought at best he would simply cut ties with her. I never imagined he would personally deliver his white moonlight to the hands of the law. That's not all, my father continued. I also heard Elias took a lot of heat in the unit because of this. Anya's family has some connections. They've been putting heavy pressure on him, but he's borne it all. He hasn't budged an inch. He paused, looking at me with newfound respect in his eyes. Sarah, I know you've been wronged. But this time that boy, he's acted like a man. He's risked his career, his reputation, everything for you. Maybe you should think again. My father's words were the final hammer blow to the remains of my defenses. Elias had not just chosen me over her. He had destroyed her to protect me. He had burned that bridge with his own hands, knowing the backlash it would bring. My heart was in complete turmoil. Memories flooded me. His clumsy care, his silent, patient watchfulness, the ferocity with which he fought for me, the utter desolation in his eyes when I told him I felt nothing. The image of his retreating back, so full of defeat, was now unbearable. He loved me. He might not have known how to say it, might not have even realized it himself until it was almost too late, but his actions were a scream louder than any words. I couldn't sit still anymore. A desperate, urgent energy seized me. I had to find him. I had to see him. I had to ask him face to face. I bolted out of the house, ignoring my mother's calls, and ran like a madwoman through the streets toward the train station. I didn't care about the cost, the time. I had to get to the military compound. I had to tell him that the no that had shattered him was the biggest lie I had ever told. By the time I arrived, panting and disheveled, The sky was a deep velvety blue studded with early stars. The compound was silent, bathed in the quiet hum of night. Guided by a memory that felt both distant and immediate, I found my way to the home we had once shared. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open gently. The house was dark, the air thick with the sharp, sour smell of alcohol. Through the faint moonlight filtering through the window, I saw him. Elias was sitting on the sofa, motionless, a statue of despair. On the coffee table in front of him were several empty liquor bottles. My heart clenched so tightly I thought it would stop. I had never ever seen him like this. The always controlled, always disciplined Colonel undone. I walked over and turned on the light. He squinted against the sudden brightness, and when his bloodshot eyes focused on me, they widened in pure, unadulterated disbelief. "Sarah." His voice was a broken rasp. He staggered to his feet, swaying from the alcohol. Why did you come back?" I looked at his weary, unshaven face, the deep shadows under his eyes, and I could no longer hold back my tears. "Why did you do it?" I sobbed, the words tearing from my throat. "Why get involved? Why report her? Don't you know it could ruin your future?" He looked at me and then a slow, bitter, self-mocking smile touched his lips. That smile held a world of pain but also something that looked like reverence. He swayed toward me, lifting a hand as if to touch my face, but let it drop halfway. "If my future requires being bought with my wife's tears," he said, each word slurred but perfectly clear in its meaning, "then I don't want it." That was it. That was the confession that broke me completely. With a choked cry, I threw myself into his arms, crying my heart out, pouring out a lifetime, 2 lifetimes, of fear and a soaring, terrifying gratitude into his chest. His arms closed around me, tight, so tight as if he were trying to fuse me into his very bones. I felt his chin press against the top of my head and then I felt warm, wet drops fall onto my hair. He was crying. This man of iron and discipline who never shed tears was crying for me. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry." He repeated it over and over into my hair, his voice raw with a pain I finally understood. "It's my fault. I was a fool. I was a bastard." I pounded his chest with my fists, my sobs subsiding into hiccuping breaths. "You're a bastard. A big stupid bastard." He let me hit him, let me curse him, only holding me tighter until my storm of emotions passed. We stood there for a long time, clinging to each other in the dim light, 2 lost souls who had finally found their way home. When I finally lifted my head from his chest, my face was streaked and blotchy, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. I looked at him through my tear-blurred vision. "Elias Vance," I whispered. "Tell me the truth. When did your feelings for me really begin?" He brushed the tears from my cheeks with his rough, calloused fingertips, his gaze so full of tenderness and affection it stole my breath. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice a husky rasp. "Maybe it was the time you awkwardly tried to treat my wounds but couldn't bear to look at the blood. Maybe it was when you woke in the middle of the night half asleep just to pull a blanket over me. Or maybe it was when you, so stubborn and proud, stood in front of me and insisted on a divorce while carrying our child." He paused, his eyes holding mine captive. "All I know is that the moment I saw you pulling your suitcase onto that train without looking back, my heart felt like it had been hollowed out. That's when I finally understood. Sarah Reed had already taken root in my heart. She had grown and become a towering tree I could not live without." He looked straight into my soul, speaking each word with crystalline clarity. "Sarah, Anya was my responsibility and my guilt from the battlefield. But you are the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with." His confession washed over me like a warm, healing tide, flooding every dark and lonely corner of my soul. These were the words I had waited for an entire lifetime to hear. In this new life I had finally received them. Rising on my toes, I kissed him. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, searing, pouring every ounce of my courage, my fear, my hope, and my forgiven past into him. Elias stiffened for a moment in shock and then he responded, pulling me into a deep, consuming kiss in return. It wasn't driven by mere desire, but by the profound joy of losing and finding each other again, a connection that now felt real, tested, and unshakable. Outside, the moonlight poured down like water, soft and gentle, wrapping its silvery light around us both. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that from this moment on, all the misunderstandings and walls between us had dissolved into nothing. The happiness that truly belonged to me and Elias Vance was only just beginning. Reconciling with Elias didn't mean I surrendered my hard-won independence. Sarah's new trends was my creation, my proof that I could stand on my own 2 feet. To my surprise and immense relief, Elias didn't ask me to give it up. Instead, he became my most ardent supporter. "My wife is so capable," he'd say proudly to anyone who would listen, a world away from the silent, brooding man he used to be. He'd peel apples for me while I balanced the account books, his large soldier's hands surprisingly deft with the fruit. He even used his connections, now free of any complicating guilt, to help me navigate the bureaucracy and secure an official business license, transforming my little stall into one of the city's first legitimate private enterprises. As for Anya, the evidence against her was undeniable. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison for profiteering. The connections her family wielded crumbled in the face of Elias's firm testimony and the weight of the evidence. The woman who had been a specter haunting my first life, the source of a lifetime of quiet sorrow, had finally received her due in this one. With her gone, the last shadow between Elias and me vanished. Our relationship bloomed in the bright, clear sunlight of honesty. He was no longer the burdened, silent husband. He became attentive, tender, even a little possessive in the most endearing way. He appeared at my stall every day without fail, not as a watchful shadow but as a helper, bringing me hot meals and clumsily trying to massage my swollen feet after a long day of standing. He'd share funny stories from the unit with the enthusiasm of a boy, and listen with genuine interest to my own chatter about fabric costs and customer preferences. The other officers' wives in the compound, when I visited with Elias, could scarcely believe the transformation. The block of ice, as they'd once called him, had melted, and in his place was a man whose eyes shone with open devotion whenever he looked at me. "Sarah, you really have a gift," Mrs. Liu, our neighbor, said, clutching my hand in a mix of envy and awe. "You even melted Colonel Vance's heart." I just smiled. I knew better than anyone. It wasn't a trick. It was the relentless, stubborn power of truth and second chances. A few months later, I gave birth to a healthy, loud-bodied baby boy. Elias was a wreck during the delivery, pacing the hospital corridor like a caged tiger. When the nurse finally emerged to tell him both mother and son were safe, this strong, unshakable soldier's eyes filled with tears of relief and joy. We named him Samuel, but Elias, in a moment of soft, private whimsy, gave him the affectionate nickname Xiao Yuan, meaning little wish. The first time I held my son, this tiny, perfect being with a shock of dark hair and Elias's determined brow, I whispered his name. "Xiao Yuan. Does that mean you were wishing for him?" "For us." Elias wrapped his arms around us both, pressing a kiss to my temple, his eyes brimming with a love so profound it made my own eyes sting. "It means," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that all my wishes have come true. I will cherish you both for a lifetime." In that moment, holding my son in my arms, encircled by my husband's love, I felt as though I held the entire world. This was the happiness I had been searching for, simple, real, and fiercely protected. After my month of confinement, I didn't rush back to the stall. I left it in the more than capable hands of my mother, who had discovered a surprising knack for salesmanship. I focused on my son and on planning the next stage of my life. The fire of ambition still burned brightly within me, now fueled by the security of a happy home. With the foresight my rebirth had given me, I saw the tidal wave of China's economic reforms building on the horizon. I needed to be ready. One evening, as Elias played with a gurgling Xiao Yuan on the floor, I broached the subject. "Elias, what are your thoughts on our savings?" He looked up, his expression open. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about the future. Our future and Xiao Yuan's." I took a deep breath. I've been reading, listening. The country is changing. There are talks of special economic zones, places where private enterprise is being encouraged. I think we should invest. Invest? In what? In property, I said, the words feeling both daring and inevitable. I've been looking at a fishing village called Shenzhen. The government is pouring resources into it. Land is cheap now, but I don't think it will be for long. Elias listened, his soldier's mind analyzing my plan with a practical logic. It was a crazy idea. To most it was a backwater. But he trusted me. He had seen my business acumen firsthand. "We could use my demobilization stipend," he said slowly. It's just sitting in the bank. My heart soared. He was willing to take this leap with me. It's a risk, I cautioned him, needing him to be sure. He looked from my hopeful face to our son's laughing one. A calculated one, he said with a small smile. And I've learned to trust your calculations, Sarah. So we did it. We used a significant portion of our savings to buy several small plots of land and a couple of simple houses in that tiny fishing village. Our families thought we were insane throwing our money into the sea. But just a few years later, as Shenzhen exploded into a megacity, those properties multiplied in value dozens of times over. Overnight, we were wealthy in a way I had only dreamed of in my past life. But I wasn't done. I also saw potential in my father's world. I encouraged him to take an early retirement from the state-owned factory. He was reluctant at first, the security of the iron rice bowl, a hard habit to break. Dad, I said, laying out my plans on his kitchen table. That little food processing plant on the edge of town is about to go under. We could take it over. I have ideas. I provided him with recipes I knew would be a sensation. Spicy dried fish, instant noodles, and the addictive, brightly colored spicy strips that would soon become a childhood staple for a generation. He was doubtful, but the success of my clothing stall and our property investments gave him courage. He took the plunge. The first batch of Reed's spicy fish snacks hit the market. I designed the packaging bright and bold. And just as I knew they would, they flew off the shelves. The combination of bold flavor and low price was irresistible. Orders poured in from all over the province, then the country. Our small, failing plant was suddenly a thriving business, and the Reed family became a name associated with the new wave of prosperity sweeping the nation. Meanwhile, Elias continued his steady rise through the military ranks. His abilities and merits, now unburdened by personal turmoil, carried him to new heights of responsibility and respect. We became the couple everyone talked about. Not out of pity or gossip but with admiration. Successful in our careers, blessed in our family. I often found myself wondering in the quiet moments, if in my first life I had simply been brave enough to live for myself, could I have had this then? But life offers no what. It only offers second chances. And I was determined to wring every drop of joy from mine. Time, which had once dragged in the lonely compound, now flew on swift wings. In the blink of an eye, 20 years had passed. Our son Samuel had grown into a tall, handsome young man. He hadn't followed his father's path into the military. His mind was sharper, more cunning, built for the chessboard of commerce. With a keen business sense inherited from who knows where, he took the small snack factory I had started with my father and transformed it into Reed's Delights, a nationally renowned food corporation. My parents had long since retired, spending their days in peaceful contentment, tending to their flowers and birds on the balcony of the comfortable apartment we had bought for them. Elias and I had stepped gracefully into middle age. His hair was now shot through with distinguished silver, and the lines on his face spoke of laughter and sun, not just worry. But the way he looked at me had never changed. It was still full of the same love and adoration I had seen the night we reconciled, only deeper, richer, woven into the very fabric of our shared history. We had moved out of the military compound years ago, into a beautiful airy seaside villa we had built on one of our first plots of land in Shenzhen. Our life was a testament to the journey we had taken together. And I knew as I stood on the balcony of that villa, watching the sea crash against the shore, that our story was far from over. It was, in fact, just entering its most beautiful chapter. 20 years. The thought echoed in my mind as I stood on the balcony of our Shenzhen villa, watching the South China Sea paint itself in the fiery hues of sunset. 2 decades since I had dragged my heavy trunk onto that train, my heart a frozen knot of despair and determination. 2 decades since Elias had run after it, his own heart breaking in a way he hadn't then understood. So much had changed. The fishing village was now a forest of glittering skyscrapers. The timid girl selling bell-bottoms on a street corner was now a successful businesswoman who had helped build a food empire. The stern, emotionally constricted colonel was now a man who never missed an opportunity to hold my hand or press a kiss to my hair. Our son Samuel, my little Xiaoyuan, was now a man, running Reed's Delights with a sharp modern mind that both terrified and impressed his grandfather. My parents were content and healthy. Anne, Elias and I, we had built a life that was more than I had ever dared to dream of in my first sorrowful existence. Today was our wedding anniversary. Not the anniversary of our paper union arranged by families and organizations, but the anniversary of the night we had truly found each other in that dim, alcohol-scented living room. The night the walls had finally crumbled. Penny, for your thoughts. Elias's voice, still deep but now softened by time and happiness, came from behind me. His arms encircled my waist and I leaned back into his solid, familiar warmth. Just thinking how far we've come, I said, covering his hands with mine. He turned me gently to face him. The setting sun gilded the silver in his hair and lit his eyes with a warm, tender light. And we have so much further to go, he murmured. But first I have a surprise for you. Close your eyes. A thrill of anticipation ran through me. Elias, what have you done? Just close them. I did as I was told, a smile playing on my lips. He took my hand and led me carefully from the balcony through the villa, and out onto the path that led down to our private stretch of beach. The salty breeze tugged at my hair and I could hear the rhythmic crash of the waves. Okay, he said, his voice low and full of emotion. You can look. I opened my eyes and caught my breath. There, on the sand just beyond the reach of the tide, he had arranged thousands of deep red rose petals into a giant, perfect heart. And in the center of that heart sat a small, exquisite velvet box. My heart began to pound, a frantic, joyful rhythm. Elias. Go on, he urged, his eyes shining with anticipation. I walked forward, my feet sinking into the soft sand until I stood before the box. With trembling fingers I reached down and opened it. And I froze. It wasn't a diamond. It wasn't gold or jade. Nestled on a bed of black velvet was a ring, delicate and slightly rough, crafted from a single polished eggshell. I recognized it instantly. It was the same. The very same as the ring he had given to Anya in my previous life. The ring that had symbolized his lost love, the one I had found in his old uniform pocket, a shard of glass in my heart for an entire lifetime. A whirlwind of emotions rose in my chest. Shock, confusion, and a sharp old pain I thought long forgotten. I lifted my eyes to his, unable to speak. And I saw him. Not the confident colonel, but my Elias, kneeling in the sand before me, his face etched with a vulnerability that was both fierce and tender. Sarah, he began, his voice steady but thick with feeling. I know this ring was once a knot in your heart. A symbol of a pain I caused you. In my last life I gave it to someone I never should have, and I hurt you in ways I can never fully atone for. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring his image. How could he know? How could he possibly understand the depth of that old wound? In this life, he continued, his gaze holding mine with an absolute sincerity, I want to place it in the hands of its true owner. He took the fragile eggshell ring from the box. His hands, still strong and sure, were gentle as he took my left hand. He slipped the ring onto my finger. It was cool and light, a whisper against my skin. Comrade Sarah Reed, he said, lifting my hand to his lips and pressing a reverent kiss to the ring, his eyes never leaving mine. I, Elias Vance, have only one true love in this life, in any life. Will you do me the honor? Will you marry me again? The glow of the setting sun stretched his shadow long across the sand, a silhouette of the lonely man he had once been, now kneeling before the woman he had fought so hard to win. The sea breeze lifted my hair and seemed to blow away the last faint trace of that ancient sorrow. The knot from my previous life, the one I thought would always be a part of me, finally unraveled completely at that moment. He had not just given me a ring. He had taken the symbol of our greatest pain and redeemed it. He had made it ours. Looking at him, at the love and hope shining in his eyes, the tears finally spilled over, streaming down my face even as a radiant smile broke through. I will, I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. Then stronger, filled with all the joy of our second chance. Of course I will, Elias. 1,000 times over. I will. He rose to his feet in a single fluid motion and pulled me tightly into his arms, crushing me against his chest. I could feel the strong, steady beat of his heart against mine, a rhythm that had become the soundtrack of my life. In the distance, the waves crashed against the shore, their eternal rhythm a symphony for our new beginning, our redeemed love. I leaned against him, listening to that heartbeat, feeling the delicate weight of the eggshell ring on my finger. A profound peace and happiness, deeper than any I had ever known, settled over me. Reborn into this life, I had not only changed my fate and found truest love, but I had also seen it heal the deepest wounds of the past. How wonderful. Truly, utterly wonderful. The years following our second wedding on the beach were not an ending, but a gentle, golden continuation. The eggshell ring, encased in a tiny, transparent locket I wore around my neck, was no longer a symbol of fragility but of resilience. It was a reminder that even the most broken things can be made whole again, and that love, when it is true, can redeem the past itself. Our lives settled into a rich, fulfilling pattern. I gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of Reed's Delights, leaving it in Samuel's more than capable hands. He had expanded the company beyond snacks into beverages and frozen foods, his vision far exceeding my own. It was a joy to watch him, this son born of my courage and Elias's love, conquer his own world. My role evolved into that of an advisor and, to my delight, a philanthropist. Using the wealth our investments and business had generated, Elias and I established a foundation. My focus was on supporting women's education and providing seed funding for female entrepreneurs. I remembered the feeling of being trapped, the limited options I'd faced in my first life. I wanted to be the hand that helped other women find their own Sarah's new trends, their own path to independence and self-worth. Elias, after a long and decorated career, finally retired from active duty. He didn't slow down, though. He simply redirected his formidable energy. He became the chairman of the foundation, his military discipline and strategic mind perfectly suited to managing our charitable projects. He found a new purpose in building schools and community centers, his stern demeanor softening whenever he was around children. We traveled. We finally saw the world beyond China's borders that I had only read about in my manuals. We walked through Parisian gardens, sailed the Mediterranean, and marveled at the ancient ruins of Rome. With each new experience, we were not just seeing new places. We were building new layers of shared memory, painting over the gray canvas of our early years with vibrant, joyful colors. One crisp autumn day, we found ourselves back in the provincial capital. We were there to open a new community library funded by our foundation. After the ceremony, we took a walk, our steps unconsciously leading us through the old, familiar streets. The city had transformed much like Shenzhen. The drab, concrete buildings of the past were now dwarfed by glossy shopping malls and office towers. But the bones of the old city were still there. And then we turned a corner and I stopped dead in my tracks. There was the street corner. The very spot where I had set up Sarah's new trends all those years ago. It was now occupied by a sleek, modern boutique, its windows filled with mannequins wearing clothes far more daring than my bell-bottoms had been. I stood there, a flood of memories washing over me. The fear of that first day. The thrill of that first sale. The harsh smell of the Market Supervision Bureau officials. The feel of Elias's thumb brushing away my tears. Quite a view, isn't it? Elias said softly, his hand finding mine. I looked from the boutique to him, my heart full to bursting. It is, I whispered. It's the view from the top of the mountain. He understood. He squeezed my hand. We climbed it together. We continued our walk, eventually finding our way to the city's new, sprawling Central Park. We found a quiet bench overlooking a tranquil pond, watching young couples stroll by and children chase kites in the sky. The simplicity of the scene was a world away from the corporate boardrooms and foundation galas, and it was deeply peaceful. Are you happy, Sarah? Elias asked, his voice quiet and thoughtful. I didn't need to think. I looked at our joined hands, at the faint, delicate lines of the eggshell ring visible through the locket. I thought of our son, of the lives our foundation was touching, of the quiet, steadfast love that had been my anchor for decades. I am more than happy, Elias, I said, turning to meet his gaze. The love in his eyes was as clear and deep as it had been on the beach that day. I am at peace. I am fulfilled. I lived a life of quiet desperation once, and I was given a chance to live a life of roaring joy instead. I took that chance. And I found you, my true partner, in the middle of it all. He lifted our joined hands and kissed my knuckles, a gesture that was as natural to him now as breathing. I spent the first part of my life believing my heart had been given away on a battlefield, he said. It took a brave, stubborn woman pulling a suitcase onto a train to show me that my heart had simply been waiting for her to claim it. We sat in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the sunlight dapple on the water. The past was not a ghost to be feared anymore. It was a foundation, the hard-packed earth upon which we had built something beautiful and enduring. That night back in our hotel I took out the old locked wooden box I still kept. I hadn't opened it in years. I fitted the small key and lifted the lid. Inside, the black and white photograph of Elias and Anya lay where I had left it. I picked it up, turning it over to read the inscription one last time. To my beloved Anya. Forever. The words had no power over me anymore. They were just ink on paper, a relic from a story that was never truly ours. I took the photo to the fireplace, struck a match, and watched as the flames licked at the edges, curling the paper, consuming the faces and the words until they were nothing but black ash. It wasn't an act of anger or vengeance. It was a final act of release. The last thread connecting me to that other life, that other Sarah, was gone. Elias came up behind me, wrapping his arms around me and resting his chin on my shoulder. He didn't say anything. He just held me as I watched the embers die. "Did it help?" he asked softly after a moment. I turned in his arms and smiled up at him, a true, unburdened smile. "It was already gone," I said. "That was just the final period on a sentence I finished writing a long, long time ago." He kissed me then, a kiss that tasted of the present, of the future, of a love that had been tested by fire and time and had emerged not just unbroken but unbreakable. Reborn into this life, I had not only changed my fate. I had embraced it, wrestled with it, and in the end, with Elias by my side, I had crafted a legacy, not just of wealth or success but of love, resilience, and the profound beauty of a second chance. And as I fell asleep in his arms that night, I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my soul that our story, in all its messy, glorious, redeemed perfection, was finally, completely whole. The end.